Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we are diving headfirst into a profoundly radical perspective on the self, and I'll be acting as your impartial guide through a truly fascinating existential deconstruction presented by none other than Jim Carrey. Now, for decades, the entire world has known him as this larger-than-life comedic force, right? A Hollywood superstar, a total household name. But over the last few years, Carrey has been sharing a philosophy that completely dismantles the very identity that made him famous in the first place. We're going to look closely at his views on ego, the illusion of the self, and a genuinely paradigm-shifting way to look at depression. Let's get into it. So let's kick things off with a pretty wild realization from the man himself regarding just how fragile his own celebrated identity really is. He literally asked, "Who the hell is Jim Carrey?" He explains that at a certain point he realized how incredibly easy it was to just lose the concept of Jim Carrey. And think about that for a second. If the identity of one of the most recognizable people on the entire planet is that fragile and that easily misplaced, it really begs the question of whether that identity was ever real to begin with. Which naturally leads us to a massive, fundamental question that challenges the core of how most of us view our everyday lives. And I really want you to keep this in the back of your mind as we go through this explainer. Who are you without your achievements? Because, society constantly tells us that we're supposed to be important, that whatever we dream can come true, and that our milestones define us. But Carrey's philosophy strips all of that away. He asks us to look underneath the accolades and the external validation to see what's actually left. All right, Section 1, the construct of meaning. To really grasp where Carrey is coming from, we first have to look at how he completely tears down the idea of mattering. He argues that our desperate need for things to matter is really just a fabricated human construct, rather than some objective truth of the universe. In fact, he compares this obsession with mattering to the human psychological need to invent deities. We desperately want our actions, our legacies, and our struggles to have some kind of ultimate cosmic weight. But Carrey bluntly states that he doesn't believe any of it actually matters. It's an idea born entirely from human psychology, not universal reality. So if nothing actually matters in the traditional sense, what does he believe in? Well, instead of a traditional sense of self, he views existence through the lens of a universal, divine energy. He asserts that absolutely everything is divine. Literally, there is no single thing that isn't divine. So rather than viewing himself as this separate, isolated individual trying to leave his mark on the world, he simply declares, "I'm that." He identifies as part of this omnipresent energy, and by doing that, it completely removes the intense pressure of what's happening to him on an individual level. Moving on to Section 2, the evolution of ego. This perfectly sets up how he views the evolution of the ego over a lifetime. It's like a timeline. Carrey observes that we spend the first half of our lives basically just acquiring things. We buy the cool cars, the nice clothes, and we seek out the admiration of others, genuinely thinking we can somehow add these things to ourselves to build a rock-solid identity. But then you hit the realization phase. You get all these things that look exactly like what society calls success, only to discover that they can never actually fulfill you. They don't make you truly happy. And that realization forces the final stage, the necessary release of your attachment to all those worldly things. And here's the absolute kicker, presented in this really remarkable quote. Carrey believes he literally had to reach the absolute pinnacle of societal success, specifically to recognize how empty it all is. He says, "I had to become a famous idea in order to give up my attachment to those things." Because he achieved everything humanity is told to strive for, he was in this uniquely privileged position to see firsthand that the finish line, it's an illusion. He got the whole shebang, all the stuff people dream about, only to realize it just doesn't generate actual happiness. When you look at it from this viewpoint, the boundaries that divide us into neat little categories are nothing more than ideas. He points out that the only things separating people, take racial labels like African American or African Canadian, for example, are simply concepts mixed with historical adaptations to climate and weather. His ultimate conclusion to all these societal divisions and personal labels is incredibly blunt. I don't believe in any of it. We've all just collectively agreed to believe in this grand illusion of separation. Which brings us to Section 3, sadness versus depression. Now, this part is an absolute game changer. Carrey completely redefines how we talk about mental fatigue. He draws a stark contrast here that might really shift how you view your own mental health. He defines sadness as a reaction to external events. It's happenstance, grief, reacting to what did or didn't happen to you today. But depression, He argues that's entirely different. He views depression as your body actively rebelling against you. It's your physical body saying, I don't want to hold up this avatar you've created in the world anymore. It's too much. It is a total biological rejection of the fabricated identity you've been forcing yourself to maintain. To really drive this home, he offers this fascinating, incredibly powerful piece of wordplay. Depressed actually means your body is demanding a deep rest. Your body needs deep rest from the absolutely exhausting character you're trying to play every single day. So it's not a malfunction. In his view, it's a necessary intervention by your own nervous system to force you to drop the heavy, artificial mask you wear for society. Okay, Section 4, the man behind the curtain. To make this fairly abstract psychological concept a bit more tangible, Carrey leans on a cinematic metaphor we all know. He compares the human ego to the classic story of The Wizard of Oz. Think about the movie. The wizard projects this massive, impressive, terrifying avatar out into the world. He wants everyone to see him as the great and powerful Oz. And honestly, that is exactly what we do with our egos. We project this booming, confident avatar to our friends, our family, our coworkers, because we're desperate to be seen a certain way.
But what's the reality behind that grand projection? You're just the sweaty guy behind the curtain. Behind the booming voice of your ego, you are merely an exhausted human being, frantically pulling levers and turning dials, struggling endlessly to maintain the illusion of this character you've built.
And he applies this objectively to his own life, completely deconstructing his own legacy in the process. He notes that movie roles like Joel Barish were characters, obviously, but even the celebrated persona of Jim Carrey, that wacky, untouchable superstar, was just a less intentional character he built. He realized he played the guy who was completely free from concern, specifically so the audiences watching him could briefly feel free from their own concerns. It was a character designed to please people, really no different than the personas you and I construct to get through our daily lives. And finally, Section 5, freedom from the character. So, after all this total deconstruction of the ego, where does that actually leave us? Carrey explains that he finds people are incredibly hungry for this message. When he tells people that it's okay if they don't want to be themselves anymore, the reaction is almost always relief. True freedom is found in the realization that you don't actually have to be you, because the you that you're so exhausted by is just a construct. It's literally just a collection of ideas. You never were that character in the first place. He brilliantly breaks this down into two distinct states of being. On one side, you have wholeness, feeling totally connected to everything as a divine, universal energy. On the flip side, you have meanness, the exhausting, isolating burden of maintaining an individual separate ego. Carrey suggests that wholeness is the ultimate antidote. When you stop obsessing over your meanness, all that heavy lifting required to be a shiny, separate individual simply vanishes. This quote serves as the absolute perfect culmination of his philosophy. The happy place is realizing that you're everything and that there's no real you involved in the first place. It's a radical, almost shocking solution to our collective existential exhaustion. By simply letting go of the self entirely, by accepting that your ego is just a sweaty guy pulling levers, you can finally find some peace in the deeper energy of the universe. As we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with something to really chew on. Think about the energy you spend every single day. What avatar are you currently exhausting yourself to project into the world? Are you due for some deep rest from the character you've been playing? Thank you so much for joining me on this deep dive into Jim Carrey's philosophy. I hope this framework has helped illuminate these complex ideas for you, and I highly encourage you to take a moment today to reflect on the sweaty guy behind your own curtain. See you next time.